What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the debut album by Maroon 5. Basically, this album is called Songs About Jane, and it came out in the summer of 2002. In a lot of ways, this album to me feels like it came out in 2004 just because it had a number of hit singles, and that's really like the main year that it crested. It really was like a sleeper album that started to crest like around late 2003 throughout 2004 and such. Had three, yeah, basically four singles around the 2004 era and that type stuff. And I would definitely have to say, but this album came out in 2002, so it was just kind of odd that this album had its popularity, but it took like a year and a half for it to start cresting and really getting some steam and that type of stuff. I want to say it went platinum, something like that. Definitely had some good sales about it. And this is just an overall noteworthy project here. I mean, this is just an overall noteworthy project here, I would have to say. I thoroughly enjoyed their 2012 album Overexposed, but there are some other ones. I'm going to start getting to a lot more Maroon 5, but this is one that I do remember some of the songs, like particularly This Love and Sunday Morning were some ones that were kind of chart heavy on like MTV back in the day that I do remember, and like, throughout the fair of that particular year and such. But I would have to say, I look after this album, was definitely a pretty big sleeper album. There's not a ton of albums I can think of that kind of had that sleeper mentality that if they dropped 2 years before, it took them a couple years to kind of start gaining ground and traction as far as that kind of went. But I definitely appreciate it. It's a good concept here, nice little buzzworthy project that just kind of took a while for this album to kind of break in and set forth. It's kind of like a sleeping giant. It was worth like the acclaim that it wound up getting. So I definitely feel like this is a natural kind of fit. And it's just the fact that this album came out of 2002 really says something, because the stuff that it was doing was stuff that really wound up impacting like pop and pop rock kind of radio throughout like the mid late 2000s and stuff. So this is stuff that you could be hearing as early as like the summer of 2002 when things were just kind of in a different valve. I feel like this is just kind of one, like later Maroon 5 albums kind of did this a lot more, especially when they had songs like Moves Like Jagger and like One More Night and some of those type tunes. But the fact that this is kind of some 2000s era stuff, it just really was like this album stood out like a sore thumb just in terms of the context of just being able to nail it quite well. And it's not like a sore thumb like it's a bad thing. And this is kind of the aspect that this is really like a noteworthy. This is definitely a pretty noteworthy album of like the early 2000s, I would have to say, to refurbish and kind of look at the prospect of seeing some of the albums that were kind of hit around this time. This is definitely a good highlight to kind of pay attention to, especially in that fold. This was, it was probably all over VH1 and MTV and those type places, just easy kind of highlighted hits, and it got to the fifth singles. That's another thing about it. So most of these songs were like top 30 singles on the Billboard 100, so they charted pretty heavily. I want to say it says that this album almost went triple platinum, so that's kind of the concept. But then actually, it might have actually went 5 times platinum. I know it went multi-platinum, so that's really kind of saying this was a really successful album, I just would have to say. So we'll go ahead and talk about this. This is just an overall kind of clever highlight here, and I like the concept of getting some of this particular stuff as far as that kind of went. This is just an overall clever album, and the timing of it was great. I feel like the concept of what music was kind of like before 2002, and this was kind of starting to crest and that type of stuff. It just had a different value, because the thing about this album is it kind of basically has like some blue-eyed soul that's just very New York and kind of coffee shop pub-esque, that just has like a lot of jive. This is the sort of stuff that like the Killers kind of do, but the Killers, it felt like they almost drew influence from like Maroon 5, because they really had like this coffee shop kind of pub music with like that dance kind of bop and just, kind of contemporary feel towards it, just pretty well executed. I feel like that's kind of the concept. Now they would master this later in the early 2010s and the late 2000s, but this early stages of Maroon 5 kind of getting some of this stuff was just very, flabbergasting in a lot of ways. This really worked pretty damn well and just stood out. I mean, that's the thing. I think this was kind of like a template to be copied, just because there was a lot of stuff I just can't think of. Maybe there were like the occasional ones, but Foo Fighters wasn't doing music like this, and like other pop rock ones, like Limp Bizkit wasn't doing stuff like this, and like, Nickelback wasn't doing stuff like this, and folks like that, just some of those type folks of this popular kind of early 2000s fair. We're not really doing this sort of thing. This is just very much, it kind of has a hip hop influence. I would say it has like a decent to mild sense of hip hop influence on here that just kind of has that contemporary kind of jive about it. Just as far as like, I mean, not every single rock album. I mean, there would be rock songs for like, there would be rock music for bars and kind of sports bars and night venues and some of that type of stuff. But this is kind of like almost club music, where it just would be places, coffee shops where there'd be drinks and that type of stuff, and live music and some of those type moments. It just has like a real sense of liveliness. Not the whole album kind of does it, but enough of it just to kind of be able to say that it's noteworthy. So and talk about I'll go ahead and talk about the 5 singles, and then we'll get to like the rest of the album. So the first single is Harder to Breathe. The first single is Harder to Breathe, and this is a pretty good highlight. This came out in 2002 and was basically the only real single from this project for a good while. That just kind of happens to be a thing. This is like a good sports bar and pub kind of highlight. I feel like this is just an easy kind of jivey energy kind of tune. It's just some real great music for like Friday Loud Pack. I feel like this is just probably one of the most energized songs on here. It has a real great sense of energy and kind of the pace of like night venue and pubs and that type of stuff. Just places where you're going to be clinking beer mugs and glasses and that type of stuff just to have a good time. It's a decent little dance jive to it, can be. It's real sense of like Friday night kind of energy as far as that kind of goes. Just a great overall energized kind of tune. The beginning of this album really has like some jivey ones, I kind of feel like, but then it kind of crests into other things. I mean, this is a blue collar album. This is kind of work and blue collar and job type music as far as that kind of goes. Just in that sort of context, it does have like it can be your like it can be your rage pack for like this all sorts of commute. So it's got morning music, evening music, night music, dance music, coffee shop music, bickering music. It has plenty of stuffs and just topics just within 12 songs, and it nailed it. And it's not like there's a shortage of any type of songs. That's pretty good. The second single, and this is one of the initial songs I remember by Maroon 5 back in the day, is This Love. Very nice kind of evening stepping out kind of song. It's an easy kind of highlight for that sort of thing. Has a lot of good jive about it. It's a very good mid jive kind of tune, and it's just a lively kind of outing hit. I really like the production on this song. The way the band did this song is really excellent. This really sounds like something the Killers would do. It just really sounds like classic kind of mid 2000s kind of pop rock kind of fare, just within like a night venue kind of sense. This is another one. I feel like This Love actually outdoes Harder to Breathe, but they're a great 1-2 punch. There's a couple more songs that do have some of this punch that these two songs kind of have, but this is like an easy kind of highlight for just like a good sense of like an appreciable nightlife. So I just would have to say this is a very approachable song. I just would definitely say it's a very affable and kind of easy to like kind of song here. That's a nice one. She Will Be Loved is the third single, and this is another pretty inescapable highlight. This is another big cresting hit out of 2004, 2005, and such. This one's just a little bit more brunch time commute, not quite as much of night venue and stepping out kind of tunes like This Love and Harder to Breathe, but this one's just kind of brunch time commute, coffee shop and Panera Bread type fare, I would have to say. And it's just a great blue collar kind of cut. It's just very, not so much sleepy, but just kind of like morning malaise. I just kind of feel like the concept of just morning life and just early kind of brunch type fare and just kind of typical kind of commute between like maybe 8 a.m. and like 11 a.m. or 1 p.m., something like that. Just kind of early midday kind of stuff just for going to like coffee shops and some of that. There is some coffee shop music in here. We're going to get to some more singles like that, but this has a great hook on here, real melodic. This is one of the best choruses on the album. It's just an easy kind of highlight, and you probably might find yourself singing along with it. It's just that catchy as far as it kind of goes. Just good vocals on here. Sunday Morning's another kind of highlight, and this is they got to the fourth single. These were just cresting throughout 2004, so all of these did real well. This is like a real nice cityscaping kind of traverse kind of tune, I would have to say. It's another coffee shop kind of bop, I would say, and it's just nice groomed and kind of prim kind of music. This one's a little bit more groomed up and a little bit more nice fare than like She Will Be Loved, but these are just kind of just, I don't want to say full-blown blue blood, but they're just a little bit more suave just in the concept of how some of these kind of go. But I do like both of these where they kind of switch the tempo to go from like the kind of nightlife and pub kind of mid-dancing kind of fare to more of like coffee shop, Panera Bread, and just kind of more, a little bit more suave and just blue collar-esque kind of feel where things are kind of toned down and just kind of in a more commute kind of sense. That's good to get those kind of ones. And then the fifth single, Must Get Out, which really only charted in Europe. This is kind of an almost song for me, but it is a decent one. I have a lot of almost songs on here, but the reason why this song is an almost song is just because it's like really sleepy, kind of penthouse type music. That's not the reason. Talk about Must Get Out. This is really kind of sleepy penthouse type music. It's just morning and or evening kind of bustle. It can be morning bustle or evening bustle. It just has that really kind of dreary kind of feel, and it just is like a tune for daily living. But I feel like this is really kind of sluggish. If you thought that Sunday morning was sluggish, it tones the tempo down by like 2 or 3 more notches on this one. It's just a lot more of like a dreary and kind of drowsy kind of song that just kind of is very, very immersed in, like, I would have to say, like morning commute and just the day to day process of how that kind of goes. Like, this is the sort of stuff that Coldplay was kind of doing. They're pretty similar on this particular song. And I feel like the combination of Must Get Out, Sunday Morning, and a little bit of She Will Be Loved is this great kind of coffee shop and just kind of bread store kind of music and just bookstore kind of music just for that sort of concept. There's just some good songs for that kind of more suave and this more, not necessarily blue blood, but just fancier kind of sophisticated, prim kind of atmosphere as far as that kind of goes. But so yeah, that kind of happens to be a thing. But that's the 5 singles. So talk about the rest of the songs on this album. The thing about this album is there's 12 songs on here. It's compact, but out of 12 songs, I wound up liking 4 songs total, which the only 4 songs I liked wholesomely. Not to say this is a bad album, but the rest of the songs I was kind of on the fence about. The 4 songs I liked were just the 4 singles minus I liked Must Get Out, but it's kind of an almost song. So there's 9 songs that I wound up at least somewhat enjoying out of 12. So the other 5 songs apart from the singles would be Must Get Out, Tangled, Shiver, Not Coming Home, and The Sun. So yeah, basically all 5 of the singles and then 4 extra songs, Tangled, Shiver, Not Coming Home, The Sun. So talk about the rest of these, like, I feel like a real nice highlight that kind of winds up being like a 1, 2, 3 kind of punch for just like that night venue kind of stepping out kind of fare is Shiver. This is like a good getting ready to step out kind of bop. It's not quite as energized as This Love and Harder to Breathe, but it's kind of like a good variation of that, just kind of having that as like a good triple punch as far as just getting some of those out and about, just for having like a pretty solid kind of dancing, stepping out kind of fare, just with some spice to it. It's just got a good energizing feel towards it, and it's some nice kind of evening commute, I would say. Great tune for getting ready to step out. The guitar licks in Shiver are pretty good on here. It's just a lighter version of This Love and Harder to Breathe. It's not quite as lively as those 2 songs, but it's a good competitor with it. Just as like I said, good triple punch for getting some of those kind of ousting kind of songs. But there's not a ton of these. That's kind of the thing. Tangled is another one that tries to have the vibe of those first 3 songs that you hear, but it's just kind of more of like soft-spoken kind of pub music, I would say. It's just got some nice, easy jive towards it, and it's kind of a lighter version of This Love. It's just very kind of, where this is a lot more where it's just kind of pub and coffee shop, where it's just not so much oriented towards the dance type vibes, and maybe there's just only like 15 or 18 people there or something like that. Just a lot more lighthearted, or just a lot more soft-spoken and kind of lighter, just in the tone of like the overall craziness of it. It's just not a ravenous kind of song, but it does have like a decent kind of bop towards it. Tangled is just a relatively lambent kind of song. I just feel like I really like the vibe about it. It's just interesting, kind of get some pub music that's just kind of for like nightlife and dance type fare, but it's not quite a wholesome dance song. It's just very soft spoken and just kind of has like a nice kind of Tangled is just a nice soft spoken song that just has like a very minor touch just in the concept of how it does. And that's just kind of the thing about it, where it is pub music, I would feel like, but it's just a very much lighter tone, just for like an easier kind of more relaxed and kind of sedate kind of night, I would have to say. That's just kind of the thing about it. Not Coming Home is kind of a bickering song. It's kind of a tense song, and it's just some evening liveliness for a possible good night. I feel like with this album being called Songs About Jane, with the concept of this kind of being about bickering kind of music and women being on your mind and such, I feel like this is a good example of one where the woman is kind of more primarily on your mind and such. I feel like this is just a good one. It's kind of like the standard bickering as far as that kind of goes. It's kind of, like I said, it's a tense song. I just feel like this is kind of one, like a song that doesn't pull it off quite as well as Through With You, but this is a good example. Not Coming Home is a pretty good example of that. But the problem with it is it's another almost song for me. The problem with it is Not Coming Home for me is another almost song. I feel like it's a solid song, but it just takes more getting used to. I just feel like, I mean, it's a decent bop, but it kind of has some energy towards it, but it's not quite as much of a, Not Coming Home is a pretty solid bop, but it's just not quite as much of a heavy hitter as I would probably like on here, I just would have to say. I mean, it's just some of these songs are just kind of ones that take a lot more getting used to. Like I feel like Must Get Out is very sleepy, and that one took some more getting used to. Shiver is a good one. This is probably the one I like the most out of the Almost songs. Tangled is kind of soft spoken. I think the energy of that one kind of takes more getting used to. And Not Coming Home is a decent one, but it's just not quite as wholesomely catchy. Like I feel like the best choruses on this album are with the singles. I mean, they did get to the fifth single, but it's just kind of the concept that the album cuts, while good, just kind of come off as just like this like B minus kind of C plus territory, just in that concept where they're winners but they just don't full blown knock your socks off. And I feel like some of these, they're just kind of 7 out of 10, approximately 6.5, 7.25 out of 10 type songs. They're solid, but they're not home run kind of material as far as that kind of goes, just within that concept. But I look after it, they're solid enough, but they're just kind of ones I'm more on the fence about. They just take more time to get used to. And then The Sun, this is the last song of the Almost songs I enjoyed. This is just a solid kind of lounge song. I definitely feel like this is some daytime kind of bar music, and it's just kind of a lazy kind of ruminating day. I feel like this is definitely one for just having one of the most sluggish paces on here, and I appreciate that, but I just didn't quite see. I mean, I like this song. I would say I enjoy this song, but it's just kind of the concept. If you're not really in the mood to lounge, it just has a very sedate and kind of sluggish kind of pace on here, that if you're not keeping up with that sort of pace, and if you don't have like beers in mind or something just within that concept, it's just, this song doesn't have much energy to really compel much more liveliness. This is very much just like a lounge kind of song and just laziness, but other than that, it doesn't have too much of purpose. It's just not really a song for the ladies as much, and it's not really a song for like jive and that type of stuff as far as jovialness and recreational kind of fares. That's this kind of thing. So, but yeah, to talk about the three songs I didn't enjoy, which was just Secret, Through With You, and Sweetest Goodbye. I really didn't like the production values of Sweetest Goodbye. I mean, this one was kind of like this one was kind of like an acoustic, almost light guitar licks kind of song, but it had some jive in there that just didn't match up. The orientation and the production of that song just was not quite as good for me. Through With You, I felt like was a poorer version of Not Coming Home. It was kind of another bickering type song that just didn't quite come through quite as well. I pretty much felt like the Through With You was another bickering song similar to Not Coming Home, but the production values were just not quite as catchy to me on that one. I feel like this is another one that I talked about, that the album cuts quality was just not quite up to snuff enough. It was just a little bit too like sleepy, and just too, it was just a little bit too unsung for my taste as far as that kind of went. I mean, some of these were just kind of more like offhanded to the point where they just didn't quite have the compellingness. I feel like they really needed another song like, She Will Be Loved or This Love or something like that. But I feel like the concept behind it, I mean, I did find these bickering songs kind of necessary, but I don't know, just the melodies were not quite as catchy on that song. It's the same thing with Secret, where this was just kind of like a more, yeah, I just didn't really like the bluesy kind of production of Secret. That one was like a more kind of sleepy kind of one, just and drowsy kind of one that just didn't have the effectual energy of some of these other ones. So that's just kind of the concept. Me, just I feel like this is a pretty sleepy album. It's a lot of dreariness on here, and just kind of more lazed and kind of unsung kind of energy, where it works most of the time, but then, with the four singles it does, or 4 out of 5 of the singles it does. But a lot of these Almost songs are kind of ones that just take more time to confirm whether or not they're hits. I would have to say I don't own this album. I just would have to listen to it over the next few months or something like that, or further, just to see if these songs were to thoroughly continue to connect with me, because that's just kind of the thing. This is like a sleeper album. It took people a while to connect with this album just when it came out 20 years ago, and it's kind of the same thing. I just look after it. There are some good songs on here, but they're just not full-blown, immediate, knock your socks off kind of songs. This is very much like a slow burn album, and as a result, it just kind of gets maybe not so much a horrible score, but it just kind of more of a mixed bag, just as a result of these not just all being winners just up front right on the lines. I think that that's just kind of the concept about it. So, me liking at least 4 songs out of 12 plus 5 Almost songs, I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 6.75 out of 10. I would almost give it a 7, but I'm just kind of on the fence about it as far as that kind of goes. It would either get a 6.75 or a 7. I'm just going to give it a 6.75. It's not too much of a difference. I feel like that's pretty good. 4 hit singles, just because there were only 4 full-blown songs that I liked out of 12, and that's really not that spectacular. But I feel like the 5 Almost songs is just kind of a mixed bag as far as that kind of goes. But the social score, I will give an 8 out of 10 to, just because there were some highlights on here, and I do feel like it had a lot of jive, like 3 good singles for coffee shop type music and blue collar kind of morning fare, three good songs for like some dance type music. And like I said, I'm really close to making Shiver almost like a song that I would think would be like the fifth full blown hit that I like. It was just kind of one that's still kind of, as far as that kind of goes, but three good songs for kind of dance and nightlife, and just the concept of just some other ones that do have like that coffee shop and just kind of more kind of commute, just typical kind of standard commute, just with it's just kind of typical bachelorhood kind of conduct as far as like a lot of this kind of goes. So that's just kind of the concept about it. So it gets an 8 social. In terms of the future, like Maroon 5 dropped their last album in 2021. So that's pretty good to kind of get that, I would have to say. They've dropped a series of albums. They were here all throughout the 2010s with numerous hits. I want to get to some more of these, but I would have to say this is a pretty slow burn and bubbler of an album. But I just think, on the dot immediately, it didn't completely knock my socks off, but it is got some quality. It does have some quality.